Hello students, today we are going to be talking about The New Colossus, a poem written by Emma Lazarus. It's extremely famous. We're going to talk about a little bit of the history behind the author herself and also the history behind the Statue of Liberty, which is the subject of the poem, and it's also the poem is also partially inscribed at the bottom of that statue. So if you ever go visit New York City, you can take a little ferry and go out into the harbor and go onto Liberty Island and see for yourself. But today we're going to learn a little bit about that before we read the poem, because historical context is very important. We have to know about the author, who she was. We have to know about why she wrote what she wrote. We need to know about what was going on in the world when this poem was written in order to understand the poem itself. Okay, so Emma Lazarus was a Jewish female poet, and she had family members who were fleeing Europe during the Spanish Inquisition on her great-great-grandfather's side. So the Spanish Inquisition was a time in Spain when the Catholic monarchy was trying to convert or imprison people who were Jewish. So a lot of times people think that the only person who had any kind of hate towards Jewish people was Hitler, but that's not true. Anti-Semitism has a long history in Europe, way before Hitler. So we're talking centuries before World War II even happened. Anti-Semitism was a major factor in Russia, Spain, Germany, other places in Europe. So Emma Lazarus's ancestors were fleeing because of their religious identity and their freedom and who they were, and so they moved to Brazil. I think that that's pretty interesting because Emma spent her life really working to improve the lives of Jewish immigrants in her home city of New York. So after her family fled to Brazil, then eventually her ancestors ended up in New York City, and that's where Emma Lazarus was raised, and that's where she worked with her activism. That's where she wrote. She wrote her first poem as young as 14 and got published, and lots of extremely famous authors were praising her work in Scribner's magazine and other magazines. Can you imagine being a famous poet published by the age of 14? That's extremely young. Also, we have to point out that she is a woman, and most of the authors and poets in the 19th century were male. We have a few, most famously Emily Dickinson as an example as a female poet, but she stands out because probably I would say 90% of famous poets from the 19th century were dudes, were men. So she must have been a pretty confident young woman to be like, you know what, I'm gonna write a poem, I'm gonna get this published, and it's gonna be amazing. And it was. So she started publishing between the age of 14 and wrote poems for the magazine up until she was 17. And she kept writing her whole life. In 1883, she wrote the poem that we are going to read tomorrow, The New Colossus. And this was a sonnet. We're going to talk more about a sonnet later in the week, what that means, but it's a specific structure of a poem. So it's a sonnet poem, and it was written in 1883 as part of a fundraising effort to get the Statue of Liberty a pedestal. So she wrote the poem and sold it at an auction. And then that money that was made off of the poem sale was used to purchase and build the big stone pedestal statue thing that goes underneath the Statue of Liberty. So that's pretty interesting because her work not only is inscribed in the pedestal, it paid for the pedestal. So she's had a huge impact on the history of the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty, there was one more thing that we were going to talk about with the author, Emma Lazarus. She, as mentioned, she lived in New York, and she learned about her ancestry. She became extremely fascinated and saw violence that was going on against Jewish people in Russia. in pogroms, so she wanted to do something about it. So she did lots of work and lots of volunteering and lots of donating, and she started different foundations to help Jewish immigrants acclimate and be successful in New York. And so I think that's pretty cool because she stood up for a group of people that was being oppressed. Okay, anyways, the Statue of Liberty was created in 1886, or I guess that's when it was commemorated. That's when it was finished and put up in 1886. Originally, it was a copper statue, so it was like the color of a penny, like a dull brown, not super shiny, but the color of copper. As we know now, it is a light green color. So copper, when exposed to air and seawater and wind and things like that, it does eventually change from the brown copper color that we know to the green copper color that we picture when we picture the Statue of Liberty. So that's how we got this weird green colored statue. It was a gift from France, from the French sculptor, please ignore my bad accent, the French sculptor Friedrich Auguste Bartholdi. Not sure how to say it like in proper French, but that's his name. And he also worked with Gustave Eiffel, who was the creator of the Eiffel Tower. So these French sculptors were making it as a gift to give to the United States as a birthday present in 1886, because that was 100 years after the United States was founded in 1776. So it was like a centennial gift. France and the United States had worked together in the Revolutionary War, and so there's a long allyship and friendship between these two countries. So these French sculptors created and gave the Eiffel Tower to the United States. So the Statue of Liberty is stylized after a Roman goddess of liberty, of freedom, and she's holding a torch, which is meant to be a beacon of hope to welcome immigrants to the United States. Also, around her ankle is a broken chain, a broken shackle, which is meant to celebrate and commemorate the ending of slavery, because in 1886, slavery had just recently ended. Unfortunately, it kept going on way too long, but as we know, after the Civil War, it was officially declared unconstitutional. And so that was a nod to abolition and the new freedom that people were given, that they should have already had, but that was made when the Constitution was amended. So also, we know that she has a crown on her head, which represents the power of the government, the power of the state, but she mostly is supposed to represent freedom. And the Statue of Liberty is one of the most recognizable symbols in the entire world. Everyone knows that it means American freedom, and it also is very commonly seen to be a welcome for people who have recently immigrated. And when people were immigrating primarily by boat in the 19th century, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of immigrants would come through Ellis Island and New York Harbor, and one of the first things they would see would be this beautiful Statue of Liberty to welcome them to the country. So tomorrow we will be reading the poem from which the vocabulary words come and that this historical context was about. So make sure that you tune in tomorrow for a reading of the poem, and then we'll do a little bit of analysis. I just wanted to go ahead and remind you about the vocabulary words that we know. Let's see here. We have the word brazen. That's going to be our word for today to remember, which means brass and bold and fierce. And then we also have the word, let's see, harbor, which represents safety. So both of those words are going to be important in the poem. Please make sure that you're working on your vocabulary and you're working on your no red ink with the subject-verb agreement. Please email me at sfrank2@houstonisd.org with any questions. Thank you and have a good one. Bye.